Welcome to Notes from the North with Kyle and Sam.
Welcome back to Notes from the North. Kyle and Sam here. And Kyle, the Vikings season is officially over. I know we kind of prefaced it last week feeling like the odds were stacked against the Vikings. And
Mhm.
uh, again, I don't know at what point people were able to still remain hopeful. I think it felt like, as I got a temperature of the fan base from what I saw on Twitter, which is always a great resource, it,
That's
you,
right.
you
Yeah.
it did feel like there was a lot of, okay, this is done, and almost a little bit more of a scoreboard watching of how's the pick gonna look,
Yeah.
or where's the pick fall versus this team's ability to succeed. And
Right.
I don't know, like I was still trying to keep a little bit of hopefulness about the game, and you know what, like
Yeah.
let's just see, and maybe this will work. But it became very clear the Vikings were done, and if you looked around the scoreboard
Yeah.
around the league,
Yeah.
they were eliminated. Felt like pretty early on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, when the Saints alongside the whatchamacallit there, the other NFC South team, the Bucks, when they won, when those two teams won in the early slate, it was officially over for the playoffs. Does I mean the Vikings could have won the game, and so if you put stock into that, then go ahead and keep watching and keep cheering. But if the point was, oh, well, we really hope that they get into the playoffs, that was done before the Vikings game was done. That was decided, right? So um, it almost feels like this season has kind of almost feels kind of merciful that it's done. You know what I mean? There's just so much pain in a very literal sense, so many crazy injuries. I mean, before the game began, Jalen Naylor got put onto the injured reserve. He was the 12th player put on injured reserve. Um, so like there's been so many issues with health wise. Um, the only priority in my mind for this game was seeing Justin Jefferson clear 1,000 yards. That was really. I know it's kind of lame to like put so much on just like an individual stat, but like it is important to him, and that's not a bad thing. Like team success is crazy important to him. We should want him to as well want that individual success as well, right? And so it was really good to see him very comfortably clear 1,000 yards. And start his opening 4 years of his career, the first 4 years of that rookie contract. It's going into his fifth year option now, um, surpassing that note. And I mean, 7 full games lost, and then 2 games played partially, right? Because he only played a partial game for the Raiders and then a partial game for the Chiefs, right? And if you kind of stitch those 2 games together, it was about a quarter or so for Las Vegas. It was 3+ quarters for Kansas City. You kind of stitch those two together, you maybe have, roughly a full game lost, right? In a sense. That's not perfect. But the idea being that maybe in terms of full playing time, he missed like 8 games, right? And he's still, what, I think 1,074 yards.
Yep.
Pretty damn good, right? And what was really, really, really encouraging, what I like to see the most is the yards per reception average 15.8 per catch, even amidst all the craziness. And so I will say, here's my plug for Nick Mullins. I continue to believe that Nick Mullins is basically the perfect backup quarterback. Um, so he spoke to the media after the game, got a bit emotional at different points. Just you could tell that the season meant a lot to him. The opportunity that's in front of him meant a lot to him. He personally had all these ups and downs, both on like a very small level within games, but also in like a week to week, getting benched, getting inserted back in the game, getting in the starter, all this stuff. But one of the points that Mullins made in this press conference, which I thought was really good, was when you're a backup quarterback, you want the guys to want to play for you and to play with you. Like when you step into that huddle, are the dudes excited about going to battle with you, right? And Nick Mullins to me is that dude. Like that's like, so if you're the QB2, like I really want someone who's going to help the starter prepare. He should have really the QB2 should have really good work habits, good brain in his head, help the starter prepare. When he goes into the game, if and when he's needed, rally the dudes. Like your teammates are stoked, not stoked to see you in there because it means the starter's been injured. But we're stoked that it's you who's in here because we know you're going to give us a chance. So to me, on like he just passes both those tests like so emphatically, so clearly. His deep seam shots, Nick Mullins throwing that deep, Johnny Munt in the seam, 32, third and 30, 32 yards, right? That pass to Jordan Addison, right? Like he throws an excellent seam pass, or he is capable of throwing an excellent seam pass. I know a lot of his ball's been inaccurate, yada yada. Mullins to me is the friggin' perfect QB2. I get it, interceptions, so on and so forth. He's the perfect QB2 within reason, right? You're
I
not
was
getting
gonna
Joe
say,
Burrow as your backup quarterback. You're not
yeah,
getting like Trevor Lawrence as your backup quarterback. Within reason, Nick Mullins, he is it for your backup
right.
quarterback.
Yeah, I might say he's the ideal backup
Yeah.
quarterback.
Okay, not perfect, maybe. Okay, he's ideal. He's ideal.
Yes, yeah,
Fine.
and
Fine.
I think your point is made, and it was interesting. Like you talk about the Justin Jefferson, like
Yeah.
getting 1,000 yards. Like it did feel like yesterday was a bit of that. Okay, you know what? Let's see what some personal achievements can be made here.
Yeah,
I
man.
know, like from
Yeah.
a Mullins perspective, was really hoping he'd get to 400 yards. Came up just short
Yeah.
of that. Um, but it did feel almost like Mullins started a little bit slow yesterday. It felt a little bit like
He did.
he a little bit hesitant. And then the game almost is like, okay, we need some big plays, and he just started to
Yeah.
really
Exactly.
rally and was like, okay,
Yeah.
let's start making some things happen.
Yeah.
You mentioned that 3rd and 30. At one point until the
Yeah.
second half, that might have been the best
Yeah.
play of the game.
Yeah.
Which
For
again,
both them. For both
yeah,
Munt and
yeah.
Mullins. Amazing.
Yeah, like don't obviously you don't want to put yourself in a 3rd and 30. That's not a great spot to be, but
Yeah.
made it work. Um, but yeah, I think you talk about yesterday, and I think there is I I'm mindful of the fact that it would be easy to move into what's next talk here. But I will talk about Jefferson a little bit here because one of the things that was interesting yesterday is that as the team was struggling early on, Jefferson was visibly frustrated, more so than he has been. And it felt like yesterday you talk about the record and trying to get him to 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
It felt
Yeah.
like the Vikings' plan yesterday was we're just going to get the ball to Jefferson any way possible, as much as we can, and just try to make sure that this guy's happy because I think the last thing you want is for him to go and
Yeah.
into the offseason 4 catches, 29 yards, and for that to
Right.
be the last
Yeah.
performance of the season.
Yeah. Especially if you partner that with a losing effort. If there's going to be a losing effort, at least let Jefferson feast. Because he came into the NFL in 2020. So let's hear. So 2020, the Vikings finished 7-9. 2021, the Vikings finished 8-9. 2022, they finished 13-4 and then melted down in the opening round of the playoffs. And then here we are in 2023, they're 7-10. So he's been below average, above average, and then they crap their pants, and then below average. And I'm saying as a team, not him personally, but as a team, that's what he's been a part of. And so um, the Vikings really we want to keep him happy on an individual level. You are the featured part of this offense. You are what makes us go. But then also there needs to be this twin urgency of not just feeding the rock to Jefferson, but we actually need to become a consistently competitive football team. This is part of Kwesi's goal. He's said this in press conferences year in, year out. We are making the playoffs year in, year out. We are giving ourselves a chance to the Lombardi Trophy. That is Kwesi's goal. And he's trying to achieve that without the full-scale rebuilds of say, a Chicago Bears. Now, look at the Chicago Bears and where they're at. I know they kind of disappointed yesterday against the Packers, but look at where they're at, right? Another 7-10 team. Vikings are 7-10, Bears are 7-10, right? And it's kind of interesting to see, Ryan Poles and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah were signed in the same offseason. Now, obviously they came into different scenarios, but how each one has kind of managed their teams, their personnel, their draft picks, their cap space, and so on, in this effort to turn the team into basically a juggernaut in the North. Aaron Rodgers is gone, right? Jordan Love might be great, might not be great. We'll just see. Detroit's rising. But you kind of have this sense of like the NFC North being a little bit up for grabs. And so it is kind of fascinating to look a little bit right now of where the Vikings find themselves, where the Bears find themselves, and kind of how the GM's philosophies have kind of influenced these outcomes, right? And so if you look at it purely from an asset standpoint, it's much better to be a Chicago Bear because they got those high picks. They got the first overall pick in the draft. They once again own the draft board. They got 2 top 10 picks and they got the first overall pick. And then they have, a decent amount of cap space as well. So be kind of fascinated to see how that goes. One final point. This is totally out of left field, Sam. And so you can just say, forget it if you want. So you mentioned Twitter and using Twitter as a guide for what Vikings fans are thinking. And we all do this, I think, because Twitter in a lot of ways is the social media for sports coverage and where a lot of sports fans go. But I wonder what percentage of Vikings fans are actually on Twitter. So if we say, even if we could say like, oh, here's the consensus for Vikings Twitter, okay, fine. But only what, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 more? Like what percentage of Vikings fans are actually on Twitter? And then we use them as a stand-in for Vikings fandom as a whole. And so I'm sure there's someone out there who studied this, but do you have any sense at all, or whether that's risky business, boiling down Vikings fandom just to Twitter? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say it's an interesting question because I think I also would say there's a difference of being on Twitter versus like putting out consistent opinions and
tweeting on
thoughts
Twitter. Exactly. That's
on
right.
Twitter. Like I'm on Twitter and I don't tweet. I like to go and look at that. And I think there is like, I actually think that there ends up being, I would say it's less than 10%. Well, I would say actually probably in some ways, I guess there's also a bit of a, who you could tweet a lot and have 3 followers, being your mom, your sister, and your, it could be pretty limited, but I do think, I know when I'm looking at Twitter, I think that there's enough of a diverse group of opinions where you are able to see a wide, like this, you have a diverse idea of Kirk Cousins is the guy. Kirk Cousins should not be here. Kevin O'Connell should be fired. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah should be gone. There's a lot of back and forth there, but it would be interesting if you were to poll all of the fans. You were able to send out a survey to all of them and get a bit of a sense. Like sometimes I know articles will write, okay, how much confidence do you have in this team? How much confidence do you have in roster construction? Like how are you feeling about cap management? How are you feeling about Kevin O'Connell? How are you feeling about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah? It would be interesting to see because at the end of the day on Twitter, people are really good at making an argument for what they already believe in and where they're at. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think it's a very small percentage. I guess I would say that there's lots of opinions out there. It would just be, I would be curious to see what the general consensus is, or the percentage of where people sit on some of these highly debated topics.
And we won't get into because this is in some ways a sidetrack, but it is kind of interesting to think, one, what percentage are actually on Twitter, and 2, Twitter and social media more broadly maybe has a tendency to push opinions to extremes. And so within that, where you have 2 camps of O'Connell's great, O'Connell sucks, let's fire this dude, and you kind of maybe have these 2 camps. And I know it's not that clear cut. I know even on Twitter, it's not that clear cut. But I do wonder, even then, once you shrink it down to the percentage of Vikings fans, of how much their opinions get manipulated by the snowball that rolls down the hill and picks up momentum, and it just this sense of like kind of the group kind of collectively thinking one relatively extreme thought, in the sense of like, Kevin O'Connell sucks, he shouldn't be the Vikings head coach. That's a fairly extreme thought for someone who's actually done quite well, all things considered, over 2 years. And so anyhow, we won't sorry, that's total sidetrack, but I find it interesting. But
no, I do think it's interesting. Maybe I'll get us slightly back on track. I'll do a little bit of an
bring us in, Sam,
because again, it's an interesting situation here, because I think you have yesterday's game, and one of the things that I've seen a lot of people talk about is as the Vikings season comes to a close, there is this is a competitive rebuild, and almost there feels like a little bit of an excuse. And I think, to be fair, the Vikings made moves this offseason that did prove they were not all in. They didn't spend all the way to the cap. They didn't go and make some moves to try and make sure they had the most competitive roster for this season. So there is some fairness to that. Uh, and again, the Vikings had a lot of injuries, but a lot of key injuries. And I don't love the idea of
Exactly.
blaming injuries on performance. Like, again, everyone deals
Yep.
with injuries. I think you can look at the severity of the Vikings injuries and make a little bit of a case. But at the end of the day, the Vikings had chances to win this year, and they had the ability to be better than their 7-10 record.
Exactly.
There was not, they didn't lose by more than one score until these final 2 weeks.
Yeah, man.
And we're all 7-10. But I do see that there is a bit of it almost feels a little bit like a backpedaling, but there is like people are looking at Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and bringing the record from the last 2 years and saying, well, okay, well, if you look at them as a whole, I'm trying to remember the number. Well, 20 and 11.
20. Yeah.
No, what's the right number there? 20 and 14.
So 13 and 7 gets you to 20. Yeah. And then 14. Yeah.
It's early.
That's
20,
all right.
2014, one playoff loss. And there's a
Cheers
bit
on
of
the coffee. Yeah.
yeah, I haven't had it yet.
Yeah.
There is a bit of a like, well, let's look at it as the whole body of work. And it does feel like last year elevates this year a little bit. Like last year was a strange year. All that to say, I guess I have a hesitation about looking at and combining those two records from the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about your opinion, because
Yeah.
I think there is a bit of an understanding of, each year has its unique challenges, and we do want to look at what have these people, like what has management, what has coaching done over the span of their time here.
Yeah. So I mean, neither the GM nor the head coach have been perfect, right? Like that 2022 draft class continues to look very poor, especially with the Caleb Evans really struggling down the stretch. Doesn't mean the final chapter's been written for him. Doesn't mean he can't still be the long-term CB2 in Minnesota, but he has been unplayable bad over these past few weeks, and he's been benched, right? Within these past few games. And when he has been benched, like in the Packers game, like he was like unplayably bad and yet still had to be on the field kind of thing. And so that doesn't bode well for a draft class that was already looking really, really poor. So in the one hand, you say, okay, so more recently they just haven't played good. You know what I mean? They've lost every game since the bye except for a 3-0 win against the Raiders. When Josh Dobbs had his couple games, Falcons and Saints, and then you're going into week 11, if you had just said the only win left is the Raiders in week 14, every other game you're going to drop. And you're going to have basically 3 quarterbacks now. Each one of them is going to be benched. And Dobbs, Hall, and Mullins, each one's going to be benched. And the hierarchy is going to kind of move like this a little bit. It's been a kind of a wild year. Like I really disagree with Kevin O'Connell's decision to not ride with Mullins. I think Mullins should have been the dude coming out of the bye. And I think Mullins should have been the dude going all the way through. I don't think that's revisionist history. I think I've actually been quite consistent on that point. Mullins is the dude who, if the goal is to win, Mullins is the dude who gives the best chance to win. If you're looking for a tank commander and you just want to, plunge down the standings and fine, we can debate not putting Mullins in. But if you actually want to win and make the playoffs, it's I think quite clear who the best option is, even though he has his faults. I get it. So I don't always agree with, like, the GM has made some bad moves. More recently, I think Kevin O'Connell's made some bad decisions. He's the head coach, the offensive coordinator and play caller, and he played quarterback in the NFL. Him going up and down like this on the starting quarterback decision, to me, looks really bad. Doesn't mean he should be fired. Doesn't mean he's a bad coach. It does mean that sometimes I think he makes mistakes. Just my opinion. Okay. So I don't know, Sam. I mean, I think right now, I think you can I actually kind of like stepping back and looking at the broad collective, because the perspective now is just fully shift to the future. It's kind of like, because like the Detroit Lions game was almost like, who freaking cares what the outcome is? Because even if they made the playoffs, they're not going anywhere. If they made the opening round of the playoffs, they would have gotten like friggin' dismantled, at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys in the opening round of the playoffs. I mean, anything can happen, and who knows? But almost certainly they would have gotten just run out of the place kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it almost felt like this is in a sense a long time coming. I think a lot of people, I don't want to just reduce Vikings fandom down to just Twitter, but I think a lot of people who follow the Vikings, people who write about the Vikings, people who just enjoy their football and follow them as fans, are kind of looking ahead to the future and kind of this next step in this evolution of the Vikings roster and how this vision kind of continues to unfold. It is legitimately fascinating to me, especially when you maybe place it side by side with the Bears and how that more traditional approach with polls. So I don't know, Sam. I that's my kind of crappy, long winding answer to maybe saying I don't mind the large scale view. But when we do shrink things down more recently, I think we can at times be critical of the coaches and the GM and all this stuff and the players, sure. But I almost think it's more fascinating to say, what is the Caleb Evans' future in this team?
Yeah.
Because his confidence has looked completely cooked over these past few weeks. And in reality, he's a talented corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's actually really long and moves well and is a good tackler, right? Like in reality, Kevin O'Connell can be a brilliant, play caller and offensive architect and can put together brilliant game plans. And that doesn't always come out. And so to me, I just find that quite fascinating. Kind of where the Vikings are going, I think is a fascinating conversation, just because where they were going to end up here, it's kind of back, like it's kind of been quite clear to see, especially in recent weeks, especially of the Packers, is like, all right, these guys don't have it.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I like that ability to look forward because again, in sports, there is a bit of like the numbers that we have to use them from the past, but
Yes.
the past
Yeah.
doesn't, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. The only thing it's really helpful for is having a bit of a predictive understanding and outlook for the future, and as well as just being able to use them to make our points or celebrate victories that happened in the past. But
precisely,
we talk about it. We officially get to flip the chapter, and now the season of hope, the hope-o-meter gets to rise up a little bit more now.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And Vikings fans can ride that, kind of,
it is, I think it's at a pretty low number at this point. But it will rise. It's a guarantee that it's going to go up. And I guess maybe just as we wrap up here, there's lots to talk about in the offseason. Who's staying, who's going. One of the things that does feel important that has now become a certainty is where the Vikings will be picking in this upcoming draft. And that, to me, like, it feels like that is where the conversation has shifted. Again, you can talk about who's going to stay, who's going to go, contract situations, cuts, but what, like, you talk about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, again, Kevin O'Connell to an extent, you talk about their legacy here and what they are building, what they do at pick number 11, or how they use that pick, maybe I should say, because there is always the possibility that there's a trade, and we can talk more about that another time, but how they use that will be a very telling story on their story. Again, the Vikings picking the highest they've picked since they picked Anthony Barr. And so not all the time you have, again, it's not quite a top 10 pick, but it's basically a top 10 pick, just outside of that. And so they've got they've got an opportunity here.
I'm wondering here now. I think you're wrong on that, Sam.
Okay, well, someone put that out there, but maybe I'm.
Wow, but freaking Twitter, Sam. Because I know here, look, so they picked Trey Waynes 11th, I believe, right? So I think they picked Anthony Barr 9th. I believe that was 2014. Right. Yeah. And then I think 2015 was when they picked Trey Waynes, who was 11th. And so I think this matches.
Sorry, yeah. So I guess it's saying
is that correct, Sam?
Yeah, I'm more saying like they haven't had. Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm just saying they have not had early picks. The last time they had an earlier pick
Right.
is
I see.
is
Yes. That is, yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, so let me let me because we'll talk a lot about this in the coming weeks and months, or whatever. So let me just throw this back as the final thing for today's episode, Sam. Tonight is the college football championship. Okay. And you have Washington and Michigan, and one team, I won't say which, tends to be controversial. Okay. And it's not Washington. They both have quarterbacks. They both have quarterbacks who could very plausibly be first round picks. It would almost be surprising if at least one of them wasn't a first round pick. So, in a lot of ways, there's good reason beyond just good football, good reason for Vikings fans to tune in. I swear I'm not getting kicked back from the college football playoffs for higher ratings. Sam, who is your pick in tonight's game? The Vikings have the 11th pick, but then who is your pick for this game, the outcome of this game? When you look into your crystal ball, how do you see it going for the college football national championship?
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't watched a ton of college football, but I did watch both of these bowl games. That's kind of usually when I really tune
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
That's the
this
mark
year,
of a casual fan. You tune in the
yeah.
playoffs.
So
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is a really educated pick.
exactly.
One of the things that's interesting is that often I felt like whether it's kind of an Alabama or a Georgia or Clemson for a little while, usually there is
Mhm.
one team that is head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah, yeah,
And I like sometimes this college playoffs ends up actually not being very exciting because
yeah.
it just you have this super team and they've got weeks to prepare. All that to say, I think these teams are relatively evenly matched. Um,
hmm
it
hmm
does feel like Michigan's going to pull it out, and
Yeah.
they are going to win. I think it's a fascinating storyline with everything that's happened in their season so
Oh
far.
man. Yeah, yeah,
And in
yeah,
some ways, I kind of love the idea of some of that drama. Um,
yeah,
but I am very curious to see, well, both quarterbacks play, but
yeah.
it is, I know that there's lots of hype that Vikings fans have, and there's some curiosity about quarterback. And yeah, like you said, we can talk about this, and we will
So
talk about
what's your pick? Don't
for the
dance around
tonight.
it. Give me
Yeah,
who's gonna
I have
win,
Michigan.
dude. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, you kind of hinted, but yeah, okay. So I'm fine. I think in reality, Michigan's is pretty well equipped to win, but I'll take the Southpaw, who is leading the charge over in Washington, the left-hand quarterback, and so I'll say Washington.
Okay. Well, that's good. We needed to have a different opinion.
Amen.
I'm glad I went first.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Well, end it there, Sam. Come on.
good. Well, yeah, we'll wrap up there again. One of the things that we will get to, maybe you can do a little bit, some people can do some pre-reading before we get into this, is we'll go back to some of the early season predictions. I know we made some early season
Yeah.
predictions as well. Shocker, we didn't go 100%, but we can talk about that. I know Kyle also did some writing on some bold predictions,
Yep.
and some specific predictions at the start of the year, and so we can revisit that. And then yeah, we'll continue to look at the Vikings offseason and where the Vikings go from here. And so there's lots more to talk about. And also I would just say that in terms of matchups for the NFL playoffs coming up, things have worked out pretty
Mhm.
well. Sometimes you have some
Mhm.
stinkers, some duds, but there's some pretty interesting
Yeah.
storylines, and so I certainly will be curious to continue to check in and see how the
Yeah.
NFL
Yeah.
playoffs.
Yeah. Okay. Good enough. Okay. We'll maybe next week. Frig, it's a little bit late for this. Yeah, we'll talk about the NFL playoffs next week.
Yeah. All right.
All right. See ya.
We'll wrap
Yeah.
up there again. There's going to be, I'm sure, lots of writing. VikingsTerritory.com,
Mhm.
PurplePTSD.com. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care. Enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy the NFL playoffs. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.